the childless widow was cast aside, shamed and unwanted, until a little boy ran into her arms, begging her to be his mama. Could his innocent plea open the door to the family and love she thought she'd lost forever? The late afternoon sun cast long, bruised shadows over the main street of Ashthorne. Dust rose in bitter swirls as Eleanor Cade walked with her head high, though her heart was leaden. Behind her, voices hissed like rattlesnakes low, mocking whispers that followed every step. She's no use without children. Poor Thomas, married to barren ground. Best she leaves before she brings more bad luck. Eleanor's jaw tightened, but she didn't break stride. Her husband, Thomas, had been gone 3 months, struck down by fever that swept too quickly for the doctor's hands. In his absence, the town wasted no time in reminding her of her one supposed failing, the empty cradle that had haunted her marriage bed. The Cade home, once alive with Thomas's laughter, had been claimed by his brother under a legal technicality Eleanor could not contest. Ashthorne was not a place for mercy. It was a place that measured worth by children and cattle, and Eleanor had neither. She carried only a carpet-bag, threadbare at the seams, with 2 dresses folded inside. Every step toward the edge of town felt like exile, the dust clinging to her skirts, as if even the earth conspired to weigh her down. Beyond the last row of buildings stretched the open prairie. Its vastness should have offered freedom, but it yawned before her like a sentence. Where could she go? No family remained, no friend bold enough to take her in. The prairie was not kind to women alone. She paused near the split-rail fence that marked the town's border, her breath catching in the dry wind. Her eyes burned, though she would not allow tears. She would leave Ashthorne with the same dignity she had endured within it. Then suddenly, small footsteps pounded against the dirt road. She turned, startled. A little boy no more than 6 barreled toward her, cheeks flushed, hair sticking in every direction. He skidded to a halt, clutching her skirt in both dusty hands. "Don't go," he blurted, his voice breaking with urgency. "Please, don't leave." Eleanor blinked down at him, startled. His eyes, wide and searching, were the clearest shade of blue she had ever seen. "Child," she said gently, "I think you've mistaken me for someone else." The boy shook his head furiously, pressing closer as though she might vanish if he let go. "No, I prayed for you. I prayed for a mama, and God sent you." Her breath caught. In those simple words, raw with loneliness, she felt a weight heavier than all the whispers behind her. She crouched, her skirt settling in the dust. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Caleb," he whispered. His lip trembled, but his grip did not loosen. "Please, be my mama." Eleanor's heart ached at the plea. This child's desperation felt truer than all the town's cruelty combined. And for the first time since Thomas's death, she felt seen not as barren, not as broken, but as someone needed. Behind them, the prairie wind stirred, carrying the scent of sagebrush. Ahead, an uncertain path stretched wide. Eleanor glanced back only once at Ashthorne, then lowered her gaze to the boy whose small hands clung to her as if she were life itself. Her exile had ended in a way she could never have imagined. If you think Eleanor's life just ended in banishment, wait until you see what happens when she meets the man who holds Caleb's future. Eleanor steadied herself, kneeling before the boy who clutched her skirt as if the world might take her away. Caleb's thin frame trembled beneath his patched shirt, and his dusty boots bore holes near the toes. She could see, even in his stubborn grip, the weight of loneliness pressed hard upon him. "Caleb," she repeated softly, as though trying the name on her tongue. "Where's your family, child?" He sniffled and swiped his nose with the back of his hand. "My papa's gone. My uncle takes care of me. But," his little chin quivered, "he didn't sing me to sleep, and he didn't sit at the table. He works all the time." The words struck Eleanor with a pang of recognition. She had known nights of silence, long stretches when Thomas had worked the land and she had waited, yearning for voices that never came. This boy's emptiness was too familiar. She brushed the dust from his hair with a tender hand. "I can't be the mama you prayed for, Caleb. I have nothing, no home, no," she faltered, the truth burning her throat. "No child." Before she could finish, the sound of boots crunching gravel carried across the prairie road. Eleanor rose quickly, her spine stiff, as a tall man approached. His shoulders were broad from ranch work, his jaw set firm beneath a shade of stubble. His eyes, storm gray, were locked on the boy at Eleanor's side. "Caleb." His voice was low, carrying both command and fatigue. "What are you doing running off like this?" The boy's grip tightened. "I found her, Uncle Jonah. I found my mama." The man's eyes flickered, shifting from Caleb's earnest face to Eleanor's wary one. A muscle worked in his jaw as silence stretched between them. At last, he tipped his hat in stiff politeness. "Ma'am, I reckon you've had a rough day if Caleb caught you up in his notions." Eleanor felt her cheeks heat, not from shame but from the sting of being dismissed so quickly. Still, she straightened her shoulders. "The boy needs more than notions, sir. He needs someone to listen." Jonah Brandt's gaze lingered on her, measuring, cautious before softening by a fraction. "He's got me. That's enough." "Is it?" she asked quietly. The question hung in the air like the echo of a church bell. Jonah's brow furrowed, but he did not answer. Instead, he reached for Caleb's hand. The boy resisted, clinging tighter to Eleanor's skirt. "Don't make her go," Caleb pleaded. Eleanor's heart cracked at the desperation in his voice. Jonah's sigh was heavy, as though carrying both the boy's need and his own buried grief. Finally he said, "You can walk with us to the ranch, ma'am. Just for the night." Caleb's set his heart, "and I won't break it clean in front of him." Eleanor hesitated only a moment. The prairie stretched behind her, lonely, uncertain. Ahead stood the boy's imploring eyes, and the guarded strength of a man who looked as though he bore more burdens than he admitted. "Very well," she said softly. "Just for the night." Caleb's face lit with a smile bright enough to pierce the gathering dusk. He took her hand, small fingers curling into hers as though sealing a promise. Together, the three of them walked toward the horizon, the Brandt Ranch, waiting in silence. Eleanor had left Ashthorne behind, but perhaps, just perhaps, her journey was only beginning. The Brandt Ranch came into view as the last light of day bled across the prairie. Its outline was sturdy, yet weary. The barn leaned slightly, the fences sagged, and the house bore the gray hue of boards long starved of fresh paint. Eleanor felt the weight of neglect before they even stepped through the gate. Caleb tugged her hand eagerly, his small legs nearly skipping despite the dust. "This is home," he said proudly, though his voice carried a child's blind hope rather than truth. Eleanor's heart squeezed at the sight. He was trying to make her see it as safe and warm, but the silence around the place was louder than any welcome. Jonah pushed open the gate with one calloused hand. His broad shoulders carried more than the ranch's burdens. She saw it in the way his posture bent ever so slightly, like a tree braced against storm winds for too many seasons in a row. Inside, the yard bore scattered tools, half-mended harnesses, and weeds pressing against the porch steps. Eleanor said nothing, though her eyes took in every detail. Years of running a household had trained her to see what was undone, and this ranch, though strong at its bones, cried out for care. "Best you come inside," Jonah said gruffly, leading the way to the house. He lit a lamp, and its thin glow revealed a room stripped of softness, bare table, a few mismatched chairs, and shelves lined only with what necessity demanded. No curtains, no stitching of a woman's touch. Caleb tugged her skirt. "Sit next to me." He clambered onto a chair, patting the space beside him. Eleanor eased down, setting her carpetbag at her feet, feeling suddenly as though she had stepped into another exile, this one shaped by silence instead of scorn. Jonah set out bread and a tin of beans with a practical air. He ate little, his eyes flicking now and again toward Eleanor, as though she were a stranger dropped by the wind. She felt the unspoken question in his gaze. "What are you doing here?" "I'll be gone in the morning," she said at last, breaking the quiet. "I've no wish to burden your household." Caleb's spoon clattered to the table. "No, you promised to stay!" Eleanor placed a hand on his small arm, steady but kind. "I said just for tonight, sweetheart." The boy's lip trembled. Jonah cleared his throat, his voice rough. "You've got grit, ma'am, walking alone out there. Not many would take that road." Her eyes met his. "Sometimes the road leaves you no choice." For a moment, something flickered in his expression, recognition, perhaps even respect. Then it shuddered again. "You can use the spare room. It ain't much, but it's 4 walls and a roof." Eleanor inclined her head. "Thank you." That night, as she lay on a narrow bed with moonlight spilling through uncurtained glass, Eleanor listened to the hushed sounds of the ranch, the creak of wood, the restless sigh of wind, and the faint shuffle of Jonah moving about long after Caleb had gone to sleep. The Brant Ranch was no refuge yet, but beneath its shadows stirred the faint possibility of belonging. Morning light streamed through the thin glass of the spare room window, cutting across Eleanor's face. She rose early, instinct guiding her more than choice. For years, she had kept house, waking before dawn to tend to bread dough, sweep floors, and see to the day's first chores. Old habits, it seemed, refused to leave even when one no longer had a home to claim. She found the kitchen quiet. Jonah's chair sat pushed back from the table, his hat gone, his workday begun. Caleb still slept in a small bed tucked against the wall. The hush of the house pressed in, thick with absence. Eleanor tied her hair back with a simple ribbon and set to work. She swept the floor, finding more dust than she expected, then fetched water from the pump and scrubbed the wooden table until its surface shone. By the time Caleb stirred, the kitchen smelled faintly of fresh biscuits she had fashioned from the meager supplies on the shelf. The boy padded barefoot into the room, blinking. His face brightened when he saw her. "You stayed!" he cried, rushing forward to throw his arms around her waist. She smiled, smoothing his hair. "I said just for the night, Caleb, but I couldn't leave without helping a little." Jonah entered then, boots thudding against the floorboards, his hat shadowing his face. He paused when his eyes fell on the neat table, the biscuits cooling on a cloth. Something unreadable crossed his features. "You didn't have to," he said slowly. "I know," she replied, wiping her hands on her apron. "But it needed doing." He removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. "You'll spoil the boy if you're not careful." Caleb beamed. "She makes the house feel different, Uncle Jonah." Jonah's gaze flickered between them, his jaw tight. He seemed to wrestle with words, then left again without answering, stepping out toward the barn. The day unfolded with small tasks Eleanor could not ignore. She mended a torn curtain with thread from her bag, swept the porch free of weeds, and hummed softly as she worked. Caleb followed at her heels, eager to hand her clothespins or fetch nails. His laughter echoed against the walls like a sound long forgotten. Later, Jonah returned from the pasture, sweat darkening his shirt. He paused at the sight of Eleanor and Caleb, kneeling by the chicken coop, scattering feed. Caleb laughed as hens darted around his feet, his small hands tossing kernels with abandon. Eleanor's laughter joined his, light as the breeze. For the first time since her arrival, Jonah did not look away. His gaze softened, though guarded still. The ranch no longer seemed quite so silent. That evening, Eleanor sat with Caleb on the porch steps, while Jonah repaired a harness nearby. The boy leaned against her shoulder, content and drowsy. She stroked his hair, her heart aching with the tenderness of the moment. She told herself she would leave tomorrow. Yet as dusk settled and the prairie stars blinked awake, Eleanor realized the Brant Ranch had already begun to change. And so had she. The next week carried Eleanor into town beside Jonah and Caleb. The wagon rattled along the rutted road, wheels kicking up pale clouds of dust. Caleb perched between them, his chatter a steady stream about chickens, biscuits, and the calf born 2 days ago. Eleanor listened, smiling faintly, though her heart tightened as Ashtorn came into sight. The town's false front buildings rose like wooden judges, each with eyes eager to condemn. She had left here as an outcast. Returning felt like walking back into the gallows. Jonah reined in at the mercantile. "I just need a sack of flour and nails," he said. His tone was steady, but Eleanor caught the glance he gave her, guarded, almost protective. Inside, the store smelled of kerosene and burlap. Caleb tugged Eleanor's hand, leading her toward the jars of penny candy. She laughed softly as he pressed his nose to the glass, weighing which sweet he might beg for. It was then the whispers started. "Look there, it's the Cade widow. Didn't think she'd show her face again. Living with Brant already, is she?" The words slithered through the air, thinly veiled behind fans and lowered voices. Eleanor stiffened, her grip tightening on Caleb's hand. Old shame threatened to rise, but she lifted her chin, refusing to bow before them. From across the room, Margaret Lyle's sharp gaze locked on her. The woman was tall and stern, with lips pursed like a needle's eye. She stepped closer, her tone sweet as syrup, but edged with malice. "Why, Eleanor Cade? Back so soon? I thought you were gone for good." Eleanor met her stare calmly. "I came for flour, Mrs. Lyle. Nothing more." Margaret's eyes flicked to Caleb, then to Jonah, who had stepped up beside Eleanor, a sack slung over his shoulder. "Strange company you keep," Margaret said, her voice pitched to Carrie. "One might think you're setting your sights on replacing his late brother's wife." The air thickened. Eleanor's cheeks burned, but before she could speak, Jonah's voice cut through, firm as hammered iron. "That's enough, Mrs. Lyle." The mercantile hushed. Jonah's gray eyes narrowed, his presence filling the room. "Eleanor Cade is a guest at my ranch, and she deserves respect. If anyone here has a problem with that, they'll answer me." Margaret's lips pinched tighter, but she stepped back. The crowd murmured, eyes darting away. Eleanor's breath caught. No one had ever defended her so openly, not even Thomas when the gossip first began years ago. For the first time since banishment, she felt something shift in the air. Not pity, but a sliver of dignity restored. Caleb, oblivious to the storm, tugged on Eleanor's sleeve. "Can I have a peppermint stick?" She laughed, the sound trembling but real. "Yes, sweetheart. You've earned one." When they left the store, Eleanor sat straighter on the wagon bench. Ashtorn still whispered, but Jonah Brant had given her something stronger than silence his public stand. And in that moment, Eleanor knew she was no longer entirely alone. The prairie sky darkened early that evening, heavy clouds rolling in like a cavalry charge. Wind rattled the shutters, carrying the sharp scent of rain. Eleanor closed the last window in the kitchen, her heart uneasy at the restless groan of the storm. Caleb sat at the table, arms wrapped around himself, eyes darting toward each flash of lightning. He tried to mask his fear with a brave tilt of his chin, but his small frame trembled. "Storms can't hurt us here," Eleanor said gently, smoothing his hair. "But they take people," he whispered. "Like my papa." Her breath caught. She knelt beside him, taking both his hands in hers. "Your papa's gone because of sickness, not a storm." He shook his head stubbornly. "It feels the same. Every time the thunder comes, I think someone else will leave." Lightning flared, and thunder cracked so loud the dishes rattled in their cupboard. Caleb startled, then buried his face against Eleanor's shoulder. She gathered him close, her arms protective, rocking him gently. His sobs came hot and fast, words spilling in broken whispers. "I pray every night, Miss Eleanor. I pray for a mama who won't go away. God hasn't answered me yet, till maybe now." Her throat ached, tears burning unbidden. She pressed her cheek to his hair, whispering, "Oh, Caleb, you deserve every prayer answered." Unseen, Jonah stood in the doorway. His broad frame was shadowed, but his eyes were clear, catching the sight of Eleanor cradling his nephew as if he were her own. For a long moment he said nothing. the storm raging behind him. Something in his chest stirred a breaking, a softening. At last, he stepped forward, setting a steadying hand on Caleb's back. His voice, roughened by silence, held a note of gentleness Eleanor had not yet heard from him. "Your uncle's not going anywhere, boy. And neither is Miss Eleanor, not tonight." Caleb hiccuped, looking up through tear-streaked cheeks. "Promise?" Jonah's gaze flicked briefly to Eleanor, then back to the boy. "Promise." Later, after Caleb had drifted to sleep in Eleanor's arms, Jonah helped carry him to bed. The child's small hand clutched Eleanor's sleeve even in slumber. She eased him down, tucking the quilt around his shoulders. In the quiet afterward, they stood side by the boy's bed. Thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, its fury passing. "You've a way with him," Jonah said, his voice low. Eleanor shook her head. "No, he's the one with a way. He made me remember more than what I lost." Jonah studied her, something unspoken lingering in his eyes. At last he said, "Maybe God did answer him, just not in the way he expected." Eleanor looked down at Caleb's peaceful face, her heart full and trembling all at once. For the first time since her banishment, she wondered if her journey had led her exactly where she was meant to be. The days that followed the storm brought a subtle shift to the Brant Ranch. Where silence once pressed like a heavy curtain, small sounds began to fill the space. Caleb's laughter as he chased chickens, Eleanor's humming as she kneaded bread, even the creak of Jonah's boots as he lingered longer inside the house before heading to the barn. Eleanor moved about her tasks with quiet grace, never assuming too much, yet leaving behind traces of herself that could not be ignored. A fresh sprig of wildflowers in a chipped jar brightened the table. Curtains she had mended now fluttered in the morning breeze. Even Jonah's shirts, mended with careful stitches, spoke of her presence. One afternoon, Eleanor stood at the clothesline, pinning laundry beneath the wide sky. Caleb darted between the sheets, laughing as they billowed around him like sails. Jonah, passing by with a bucket, stopped to watch. For the first time in years, the sight of his home stirred not weariness, but something close to peace. "You've brought light into this place," Jonah said at last. Eleanor startled slightly, not expecting his voice so near. She glanced at him, her hands still holding a damp sheet. "I've only mended what was broken." He shook his head. "It's more than that." Their eyes met, a moment stretching between them, unspoken but weighty. Caleb burst through the sheets then, breaking the spell with a squeal of triumph. Eleanor laughed, and Jonah's lips curved in the barest shadow of a smile, before he turned back toward the barn. That evening, after supper, Jonah surprised them both by lingering at the table. Caleb perched on Eleanor's lap, telling wild stories of his adventures among the hens. Jonah listened, a half-smile tugging at his mouth, his eyes fixed not on the boy but on Eleanor. When Caleb finally nodded off, Eleanor carried him to bed. Jonah remained seated, his hands resting on the table, as though waiting for her return. She joined him, her fingers brushing the rim of her teacup. "Do you ever tire of carrying it all alone?" she asked softly. Jonah looked down, shadows gathering across his face. "The ranch, Caleb, they're mine to shoulder. I don't reckon it's anyone else's burden." "But burdens shared are lighter," she replied. "Even the strongest back will break if it carries too much." His gaze lifted to hers, steady, searching. For a heartbeat, Eleanor thought he might open the door to his thoughts, but then he stood, his chair scraping softly against the floor. "Good night, Eleanor," he said, his tone gentle but final. She watched him retreat to the doorway, her heart both aching and hopeful. Jonah Brant was a man built of walls, but cracks had begun to show. And in those cracks, Eleanor sensed the possibility of something more than refuge, something that might, in time, become love. The first chill of autumn swept over the prairie, settling in the corners of the Brant Ranch. That evening, Jonah built a fire in the hearth, its glow spilling across the bare walls. Eleanor sat nearby, with Caleb curled against her, the boy drifting to sleep to the rhythm of the flames. When Caleb finally slipped into slumber, Eleanor lifted him gently and laid him in his bed. She lingered a moment, brushing a curl from his brow, before returning to the fire. Jonah remained seated, elbows on his knees, staring into the blaze as though it held answers to questions too heavy for words. For a while they sat in silence, the crackle of burning wood filling the space between them. At last, Eleanor spoke, her voice low. "Do you ever wonder if the past will always haunt us?" Jonah's gaze stayed fixed on the flames. "The past doesn't just haunt, it builds the man you see in the mirror. The question is whether you keep carrying it or let it burn away." Her fingers knotted together in her lap. "When Thomas died, they cast me out, not because I failed him as a wife, but because I failed the town as a woman. No children, no legacy. Just empty arms." She swallowed hard, her eyes glistening. "They made me believe that was all I'd ever be." Jonah finally turned, his gray eyes sharp in the firelight. "They were wrong." She shook her head faintly. "I don't know if I believe that. But Caleb, he looks at me like I'm worth something. I don't know how to carry that gift." Jonah leaned back, the firelight catching the lines of strain on his face. His voice dropped, rough with unspoken grief. "You think you're the only one branded by loss? My brother Caleb's father died under my watch. I told him to ride out that day. The storm caught him. He never came back. Every time I look at Caleb, I see the weight of that mistake. And every night, I wonder if I'm enough for him." The rawness in his words struck her heart. She leaned closer, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "Jonah, you give that boy everything you have. That is more than enough. What he needs is love, not perfection." His eyes searched hers, the fire painting them with light. "And what about you? What do you need, Eleanor Cade?" Her breath caught. No one had asked her that in years. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze. "I need to be seen as more than what I lack. I need a place where I'm not a burden or a failure." For a long moment, Jonah said nothing. Then he reached across the space, his calloused hand covering hers with quiet strength. "Then maybe you've already found it." The fire popped, sending sparks upward as though sealing the unspoken promise between them. Eleanor's heart swelled with something both terrifying and tender. For the first time in years, hope burned brighter than regret. The harvest fair brought Ashthorn's townsfolk spilling into the square, lanterns strung across posts and music spilling from fiddles. Caleb tugged eagerly at Eleanor's hand as they stepped from the wagon. His eyes shone with wonder at the rows of pies and jars of preserves. Eleanor's heart beat faster for a different reason. She had not stood in the heart of Ashthorn since the day of her banishment. Whispers stirred the moment she entered, the weight of curious stares pressing down on her like a yoke. Jonah walked beside her, tall and steady, carrying himself with the unyielding air of a man who feared no judgment. Yet she felt the tension in his silence, the way his jaw tightened as if bracing for the storm he knew was coming. It arrived swiftly, borne on the sharp tongue of Margaret Lyle. She approached with two other matrons, trailing her like shadows, her fan fluttering as if she commanded a court. "Well, well," Margaret drawled, her smile thin. "If it isn't Eleanor Cade, I thought Ashthorn was rid of you." Eleanor straightened, refusing to cower. "I came for the fair, nothing more." Margaret's gaze swept over her, then landed pointedly on Caleb, who clung to Eleanor's skirts. Strange, how quickly a barren widow finds herself playing mother. The words sliced through the crowd, drawing a few gasps. Caleb's little face flushed, his lip trembling. But before Eleanor could answer, Jonah stepped forward. "That's enough," he said, his voice sharp as steel. "You'll not shame her, Margaret. Not here, not anywhere." The crowd hushed. Margaret blinked, startled, then laughed brittly. "Shame? Why, I only speak what others whisper. A widow, alone, suddenly settled at your ranch. It looks convenient, doesn't it? Jonah's eyes hardened, his shoulders squaring. Convenient? Eleanor has brought life back into that house. She's given Caleb what no one else could comfort: laughter, hope. If any of you doubt her worth, you can take it up with me. The murmurs shifted, unease rippling through the crowd. Some lowered their eyes, others nodded faintly in agreement. Margaret's fan stilled, her cheeks flushed with a rare defeat. Then Caleb stepped forward, his small voice carrying louder than anyone expected. She's my mama now. I asked God, and he sent her. You can't take her away. Silence fell heavy. The boy's declaration cut sharper than any accusation. Eleanor's throat ached as she placed a steadying hand on his shoulder, pride and fear mingling in her chest. Jonah rested a hand on Caleb's other shoulder, his gaze sweeping the crowd. You heard him. This family's mine to protect, and I'll not have it questioned again. Margaret faltered, her composure cracking under the weight of united defiance. She turned on her heel, retreating with her companions. The tension eased, replaced by a hush of respect. For the first time, Eleanor felt the eyes of Ashthorne upon her, not with scorn, but with the beginnings of acceptance. Jonah glanced at her, his expression steady, resolute. In his gaze, she saw not just defense, but something deeper: a claim, a promise, and a hope she scarcely dared believe. Winter passed gently, and spring returned with fields alive in green. On the Brant ranch, the once weary fences stood straight again, the barn mended, the porch swept clean. Yet the truest change could not be measured in timber or nails. It was in the sound of laughter carried on the breeze, in the warmth that lingered within the house where silence once dwelled. Eleanor stood on the porch, brushing flour from her apron, watching Caleb race through the yard with a stick horse. His cheeks glowed with health, his shouts filling the air with joy. She had come to this place with nothing but a worn carpetbag and a heart bruised by rejection. And now, against every expectation, she stood in the center of a life reborn. Jonah stepped up beside her, the sun catching in the gray strands of his hair. He carried a sack of seed, but set it aside, following her gaze toward Caleb. He's grown stronger since you came, he said. His voice, though quiet, carried a conviction that reached straight to her heart. Eleanor folded her hands. He gave me purpose when I had none. Perhaps we healed each other. Jonah turned to her, his expression open, stripped of the walls he had once worn like armor. You've been more than a help. You've been a blessing, Eleanor. For him, for me. Her throat tightened, tears pricking her eyes. She had waited years to be seen, not as barren or broken, but simply as a woman of worth. Now the words were given freely, without pity or scorn. That evening, neighbors gathered at the ranch for supper, a first since Thomas's death, and a sign that Ashthorne's judgment had begun to thaw. Eleanor set the table with care, her mended cloth spread neat and bright. Caleb bounced at her side, proudly declaring to every guest, "This is my mama. She makes the best biscuits in the county." The room filled with laughter, and Eleanor's cheeks warmed, though her heart swelled at the boy's unabashed claim. Jonah stood at the head of the table, his hand resting lightly on Eleanor's shoulder. His gaze held hers, steady and sure, as he bowed his head in prayer. After supper, as lanterns flickered and the guests departed, Jonah walked with Eleanor to the porch. Caleb had already dozed off inside, curled on the rug before the fire. The night air smelled of lilac, and the stars burned clear above. Jonah's hand brushed hers, hesitant at first, then certain. "You've given us back more than I ever thought possible," he murmured. "Home, laughter, family. I reckon I don't want to face another day without you here, beside me." Eleanor's breath caught, her heart leaping at the truth she had longed for yet never dared to expect. She met his gaze, her voice soft but unwavering. "Then you never have to." He drew her close, his forehead resting against hers, and in the quiet of the prairie night, Eleanor Cade was no longer the childless widow, banished from Ashthorn. She was a mother, a partner, and the keeper of a love that had risen from the dust. If Eleanor's journey from exile to family stirred your heart, just wait until you read the next tale of love and redemption waiting on the frontier.